Hello and welcome to another episode of the Iraqi Nutrition Podcast. I'm your host, as always, Juma Iraqi, welcoming you all back. It's been a while since I've done a podcast on this channel, but good news, guys. From now on, the podcast will be on a more frequent basis. I also have some other news that I want to announce. Starting from the 1st of September, I will be having 4 new team members joining Iraqi Nutrition. And one of the things that we will be focusing on is creating a lot more content to the fitness industry. One of the things is the podcast. We'll have much more content on the podcast. The YouTube channel will also have a lot more content there. And there will also be more activities on our social media accounts. So before we start today's episode and introduce today's guest, I want to mention that this podcast is available on YouTube, but you can also find it on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Stitcher as well. So welcoming today's guest is Dr. Peter Fitschen. Peter, how are you doing today?
Good. Thanks for having me on.
Thank you so much for taking the time. I think this will be a great topic to discuss for the listeners. Today's topic will be about off-season bodybuilders, where we have a couple of interesting questions that we're going to discuss. But before we get into that, could you please give the audience an introduction about yourself?
Yeah, so for those who don't know who I am, I guess, I got interested in bodybuilding when I was, 16 training at the gym, and I've kind of turned it into a career to say. And so, I started competing when I was in 2004, when I was 18. I died it down for shows 5 times, won my pro card in 2012, competed as a pro for the first time in 2016. I'm actually in the off season myself right now, so this topic is pretty applicable to my current situation. And then on the academic side of things, I have a bachelor's in biochem and nutrition minor from the University of Wisconsin-La Crosse. I got a master's in physiology from there as well. Got my CSCS after that. And then I got my PhD from the University of Illinois in nutritional science. And so I am a full-time contest prep coach through my company, Fitbody and Physique LLC. And I got some other things in the works that I can't discuss yet, but hopefully we'll be able to soon as well. But coaching is my full-time gig at this point.
Excellent. And are you mainly just focusing on bodybuilders, or are you also working with bikini fitness and men's physique?
Oh, yeah. I would say at this point, even general population, some. I would say at this point, 2/3 to 3/4 of my client base are either bodybuilders or compete in bikini figure, any of the divisions. Or power lifters, strength athletes, or they want to compete in, a physique or strength sport. So that would be probably 2/3 to 3/4 of my client base at this point. But I still do have about 1/4 to 1/3 that are general population.
Okay, excellent. Are there any competitors competing in the near future now?
Yeah, I think every week I pretty much have someone competing. Mm-hmm. Oddly enough, my schedule dies down a little bit in September with competitors, but then it picks back up in October, November. But this summer's been nuts. There's just more contests. It used to be, at least in the U.S., in this part of the U.S., in the Midwest, it used to be that there were shows in the spring and the fall, and there was kind of a gap in the summer, and there's all kinds of new shows that filled in summer. So my summer travel schedule has been pretty crazy. So yeah, I got, I think, 2 competing this weekend, another one the following week, and it's nearly every week somebody somewhere in the country, or even internationally, which that makes for some crazy check-ins on show day mornings with, the time difference.
Yeah. I can imagine that. So, all right. So let's dig into the questions. Like bodybuilders is a strange breed of people, because you see a lot of people doing a lot of different things. But what are some of the biggest mistakes you see bodybuilders do in the off season?
I would say usually it's one or, it's always extremes, right? So, we're, like you said, we're an interesting breed. We gravitate towards extremes. And so I think, two big mistakes people make. One is not gaining weight in the off season. They get done with their show and they just are afraid to put weight back on. I don't think that that's a great reason to not put weight back on. And I'd really encourage anyone in that situation to be working with it, a mental health practitioner who can help them. The other, I would say, extreme is also a problem, getting too heavy in the off season. I've been there. I was 145 at my first show when I was 18 years old. I'm 5'8", 5'9". I was 145. I wasn't that big, and I was told, hey, you need to get bigger. And it was 2004. There wasn't a lot of information available. I mean, even the bodybuilding.com message boards were kind of in their infancy at that point. And so, I just bulked. I ate as much clean food as possible. And, within a year and a half, I was 210. I put on 65 pounds. I ended up, so it wasn't it was a dumb idea, but I did net 10 pounds on my stage weight out of that 65. So I was 10 pounds heavier on stage 2 years later when I competed. But being so early in my training career, I have a feeling that I could have gained 30 to 40 pounds rather than 60. And you know what I mean? And probably netted the same amount, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Do you remember the amount of calories you were consuming at that point to gain that much?
Yeah. So ironically, I was tracking macros actually, during that off season, but I was only eating clean foods, only things that or that I deemed as a clean food. You know what I mean? It was very, very selective. There was no flexibility in my dieting really. And so, I was up to about 50, if I remember right. I threw away some old food logs when I moved, one of the times I moved, but I remember looking back and it was 5,400 a day, calories a day. Was what I had to get up to when I was younger. I mean, now that I'm older, I got up to 197 and held there on like 3,800, 4,000 a day, now, 15 years later. But back then, yeah, it took 5,400 a day to get up that high, and it wasn't pretty.
Yeah, I can imagine. But you mentioned something that some competitors, they might be afraid to gain weight when they're in the off season. Do you notice any particular athletes that this is an issue with more than others, like bikini or men's physique compared to bodybuilders?
Yeah, I would say, a lot of times, I would say, I hate to stereotype, but I would say for women, it's a lot of times more difficult than for men. I think it's a cultural thing. Like for a guy, it's like, oh, I'm going to eat all this. Guys, usually the other problem, the getting too heavy is the problem that most guys have. They're just, I'm going to eat everything. I'm going to lift all the weights. I'm going to get as big as possible. And that doesn't end very well, the other extreme, but but there are still men too who don't want to gain weight. It leads to, obviously can lead to hormone levels being suppressed for a prolonged period of time can create, health consequence. But also, the overall goal of the sport, it should be progression over time. I think everyone and their brother, I made a rant on Facebook about this recently, wants to win a pro card, and that's all they ever want to get out of the sport. But the goal really should be like, this should be this long-term like progression, continuing to better yourself, every time you diet down and get on stage. And if you're not getting any weight back between shows, I really doubt you're making any progress. And, if you really try to stay close to stage lean, you might actually start looking worse, just as a result of your hormone levels being so low and, strength being down, for so long. Gaining weight in the off season is important, definitely.
Yeah, and I actually recently did a study at the Norwegian Olympic Center where we measured resting metabolic rates of a lot of athletes, and what we noticed was a lot of these combat sport athletes that cut a lot of weight, they had a depressed resting metabolic rate, but also a lot of the physique athletes, especially bikini fitness, we had some people that were like 700 calories below their resting metabolic rate. So some of them were pretty bad, and after talking to them, they basically told us that they've been basically dieting for the last 3 years after their show, because they had a real struggle with letting loose and accepting that one of the process is that you have to gain weight to normalize a lot of the adaptations that has happened and the hormonal stuff. But which brings me to my next question. What type of strategies can you use to try and actually convince a client that this is the way to go when you experience some resistance from them for gaining the weight?
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest thing is, being upfront when you start, when you start working with them. If someone's going to start working with me for a prep, part of that conversation also needs to include, and you will gain weight afterwards. Like, prep isn't the end. Like, you don't just get there and that's where you stay. That's not the end. That's just, again, we're talking about improvements over time. So, hopefully this is something that you'll be able to do should you choose over and over and over again. And, in order to, make those improvements over time, the shows are just a step, as you keep improving over the long period of time. And so, having conversations when you start working out, like, hey, after your show, you will gain, we will work on gaining weight. We'll somewhat, take this, your preference, we'll try to take some of your preferences into account, but in some way, shape, or form, the scale does need to go up. You do need to gain back some body fat. There are, we talk about, a lot of times during the initial phases of, hey, we're starting to prep, we'll start talking about this is probably what you're going to start feeling as you get leaner. We need to gain enough weight back post-show so you don't feel some of those things again anymore, and discussing hey, it's not just get lean, it's get lean and gain. And then a lot of times too, so just always having that in there. Like a lot of times in conversations with them throughout prep, yeah, this is only short term, you will regain, they're really, really hungry, food's really, really low. That's all right. We're going to increase your food when you're done, obviously diet breaks and stuff aside, when you're done with your show, we will increase your food, this isn't permanent. And then, my biggest thing is too, if someone's struggling with that after a show, I will be the first one to refer them to someone, who actually can help them. There's, I am not a psychologist. I am not an eating disorder specialist. Those are the people that they need to be seeing. But I think the biggest thing is really taking a look before you start dieting too, as a competitor, and thinking, just really, taking a big picture view, how is my relationship with food? How is my relationship with my body image? Am I actually in a place to diet for a show? Because dieting for a show doesn't fix those things. A lot of people get into competing because they feel bad about how they look and think it's going to fix it. But if you have bad issues with eating and exercise and body image when you start prep, it's only going to get worse at the end. Prep's not going to help it. I mean, people with fairly normal eating habits at the start of prep start to look a little bit more disordered by the end. That's just the direction things kind of skew. And so if you're already starting from a disordered place, it's not going to end well. And you probably want to, take care of some of these other things first before a show. Health should still be a priority.
Yeah, I totally agree. And there's been a lot of times where I've been contacted by physique athletes, like bikini competitors that want to compete, and based on the information they provide me, I just tell them straight up that I don't think you're ready to compete at the moment based on your situation. And some of them appreciate the honesty, but some don't. And it can be a challenge sometimes to try and convince them that you're actually trying to just help them.
Yeah, I've actually had I've had more than one situation where that same thing happened, but there's been more than once where I tell them, I don't think you should be dieting for a show right now. You're not in a good place. And then, they find someone else to help them, because there are people out there that, they'll take anyone, and so, and so I don't think, if I see clear issues, I think, we need to address this first before you diet. No, and they don't work with me, they work with someone else. There's been times I've seen people, actually be really successful prepping with someone else. So I said, I don't think you're in a great place to diet. They diet for a show. They're super successful. They may even win their show. I've seen this happen a couple of times, working with someone else. But then I can think of two separate situations where it's been 3-4 years since that person competed, and I don't I don't, they haven't competed since and don't even really post about lifting or fitness anymore. You know what I mean? Like it just dug them in a deeper hole, and that's not the goal. And like you said, you're trying to really help them. It's not that you're telling them not to compete. It's telling them, hey, let's address some of these other things first beforehand so that you can keep doing it for the long term.
Yeah, exactly. I think one of the biggest challenges that a lot of competitors experience is the transition phase from going from pre-contest to the off season, because a lot of people end up gaining a huge ton of weight because it can be a challenge with controlling appetite if you start to actually eat a lot of high energy dense food. What are some of your recommendations to avoid the rapid gain, but also what are your general recommendations from transitioning from a show to an off season?
Yeah, so I think one thing I like to do, if it's possible, is have someone ready early so we can start increasing their food going into their show, so that you kind of get through that worst part of because that way you're not coming to your show's over and your food's still super low. It's maybe come up a little bit and we're getting closer to maintenance at the end. If you can do that going into a show, your launch off, start off point is in a better spot. But that obviously means longer cut, starting sooner, things people typically don't do. And so that isn't, even if you do everything as smart as you can, that's not always possible, just the way shows time out or what happens, it comes up during prep. And so when if that's possible, do that. But if not, then it comes down to having a conversation about, all right, like what can we be consistent with here? Because my goal for them coming off of a show is consistency, and so yes, you may not want to gain weight back, but it's not going to be realistic to keep your food that low. Like that's not something you're going to be able to stay consistent with. So what can you stay consistent with? So if you're struggling to stay consistent, what if we stick your intake higher right away and we just say, all right, we're going to gain a little bit faster to start. That's, to me, is still a better scenario than having them binge and go, just off the walls. And so usually we have some of those conversations about, well, what's realistic for you to stay consistent with? How fast can you increase? How hard do we want to be tracking? Like how flexible do we want to be? Do we want to be tracking, macros? Do we want to be tracking something looser? Like maybe we just worry about, calories and protein or something like that. You know what I mean? Like what can we keep them consistent? How, with? And my goal, regardless, is we got to get them gaining after their show. And I'm okay with a little bit quicker gain. If, a pound or two a week is totally fine coming off a show. Until we get them back up to a point where they are kind of at the low end of their, I'd probably set point range is how, the best word I'd use to describe it. Kind of that lowest weight where they finally notice, like, I'm starting to feel normal again. Strength's starting to come back up. I'm not thinking about food all the time. I'm not as hungry. Energy's good. I'm sleeping good. Sex drives back up, signs of hormones coming back. When we get to that point, we'll slow rate of gain down, but like we want to keep it moving until we get there. I just posted something on Instagram a couple weeks ago. I had a bikini client, super successful contest season, came out of her show. I think we had her up 10, 11 pounds in 6 weeks, and she was in a great spot. You know what I mean? Like that was kind of she got back to the bottom end of her settling point. And from there, it's like, all right, well, we can slow down rate of gain. You're good. We've gotten you back there. A bodybuilder might take longer than that. 10 pounds might not be enough. For me, 10 pounds over stage weight, I'm still not back to a sustainable place. I still don't feel great there. It's got to be more like 15, 20. But, and it depends on your division too. A bikini competitor doesn't diet down to lines in their glutes. If they did, they would be too lean for the division, but a bodybuilder needs to get there, and so there's some differences in division there too. But I guess, getting back to what I would actually do after a show, I think it's, having an honest conversation with and going back and forth and, seeing what can you stay consistent with, because even if you increase your intake faster and you're gaining a little bit quicker coming out of a show than you'd like, if you can stay consistent with it, it's still better in my book than trying to do something lower and just binging and going off the walls.
Excellent. Now, do you have any general recommendations for what do you typically do with if they're doing a lot of cardio training during their
Yeah.
contest prep, and what do you actually do with the calories? How much do you bump up their calories, for example, after a
Yes.
show?
So I guess with cardio, I usually try to pull that back like half probably to start because, you don't need to be doing tons and tons and tons of cardio. Like the goal at that point is weight gain. You don't need to be doing something that's expending all these extra calories. And so if they're doing, say, 4 hours of cardio a week or something like that, total weekly cardio time, we may pull it back to 2 to start, just start pulling that back. There's no need to be doing, and even from there, keep pulling back more and more and more. Steps, I usually try to, I have clients usually track steps during prep. Step counts, usually we keep pretty high. We still keep NEAT up. You know what I mean? As kind of as a buffer, like while we're working formal cardio down and food up, just kind of keeping NEAT up, generally can help stave off some of the, really, really rapid gain. But, I pull that back eventually too, but usually I focus on pulling cardio back first. A lot of people just don't want to spend that much time in the gym after their show either if they're doing a lot of cardio. So if we can just have them go walk around outside some more, that accomplishes the same thing. And then as far as nutrition goes, I guess that depends on the person. If someone wants to go a little bit slower, we may only bump like, I don't know, 10, 15%, something like that, to start and kind of see what happens. If it's someone who thinks they might binge or really struggling to stay consistent, we may even do like, 25%, right off the bat, 30%, get them gaining, keep them consistent. And so that depends on, the person also. So that would, I guess it's not really a one size fits all, but it's more, how comfortable are gaining, where can they stay consistent? And then also, I tend to keep a pretty close eye on people the first couple weeks. So, during prep, all my clients are checking in twice a week, more than that during peak week. But first weeks of the reverse, I'm usually doing 3 updates a week from clients during the first few weeks of the reverse. So that way there's never more than 2 or 3 days between hearing from them. That definitely helps us to make sure, one, that we catch any binges if they happen, so that they don't disappear for a week and come back and, oh man, my weight's way up now. And 2, it also helps us to, if we, say there's someone who's like, oh, I don't want to really gain all that quickly, and we stay conservative and we only increase their food like 10%, and then we notice, hey, your weight's still going down here, we can catch that after a couple days and bump their food higher, because the last thing you want to do is actually be losing weight after your show.
Yeah.
Maintaining it's bad enough, but losing it is not at all what the goal is, unless you have another show like 2 weeks later or something. If your contest season's done, you don't want to be losing weight when you're stage lean coming out of a show.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. And what type of range do you prefer? People like the rate of gain? Do you have specific numbers for that you follow as well?
Yeah, I mean, somewhere in the ballpark of 1 to 2 pounds a week till they get back to feeling normal is probably the average I would shoot for, because you want to get them back to a place they're feeling normal, but also at a place you don't also want them to binge or have, health consequences of gaining, you've probably heard as many stories as I have, gaining 20 pounds from Saturday night to Monday morning. Mm-hmm. I've known of people who the day after their show would go to a buffet with their family, and their family be done eating and they'd leave and they'd just stay there and keep eating, and their family come pick them back up later. We want to avoid that.
Yeah, and I think it's hard to stop when the ball starts to roll, and the body maybe notices that now it's finally food that's available, and it just want to keep on putting food in your mouth.
Yeah, and I mean, hormone levels aren't going to be normal either. I mean, if you look at, leptin levels are really low, ghrelin levels are really high. So, those signals that should be telling you, like the off switch, it isn't going to be working right.
Yeah, exactly. Now, after you've done with the transition, what are your general recommendations for how you like to put the caloric surplus for the off season, and do you base that on the level of like how advanced a person is, and how would you also distribute the calories between the different macronutrients?
Yeah, so I guess where would we, what would we do when we get back to that normal, hey, I'm starting to feel normal again. So we need to pull rate of gain back. Like we're not going to keep gaining 1 or 2 pounds a week. That's a recipe to end up 65 pounds over stage weight like me.
Yeah.
That's not good. But where do you pull that back to? So for someone who's a beginner, that can be quicker. We can be seeing 2, 3 pounds, a month, a couple pounds a month and be okay with it. If it's someone who's more of, I guess if you're a beginner, you shouldn't really be coming off a show. But if someone who's more like an intermediate, I'd be okay with a couple pounds a month if they're, you know what I mean? If they were, it was their first show, they'd only been lifting a couple years. Maybe they really never had like a true off season where they pushed food hard before, to really see what they could add for muscle. Even though I would recommend doing that before your first show, there are people who don't. Someone who's more advanced, maybe you're looking closer to a pound a month or so, really slow. I'd also take into account a few other things, what division someone's competing in, and if they need to add muscle for that division, someone who's competing in bodybuilding is going to need to add muscle. You're going to have to be out of a surplus for a while. Your body fat may drift a little bit more, above stage weight in the off season compared to maybe someone in bikini, who could get too big if they added too much, if they, for their division, if they added too much muscle. So, I'd worry about division, gender. Oftentimes females, especially if you're a female who it's hard to lose weight, you may not want to get quite as high as what a guy will let his weight drift up to. Especially a young guy who's, me when I was younger, eating 5,000 plus a day, I could lose weight pretty easily. And so, ability to lose weight, age, and then just when is your next show, is also something I think, a lot of people get done with one show and, I always kind of recommend at least having a general idea. Like I didn't know exactly when I was going to compete again the last time I competed, and I don't really exactly now, but I have an idea. Like I'm probably going to compete early 2020, which would be about 4 years between shows again. And so, with 4 between shows, all right, I got a little more leeway. I can sit at a little heavier weight and be okay. I have time. If you're someone who's saying, well, I'm going to compete, I don't know, 1 year from now, you can't let things drift as much as, because you're not going to have time to get back down there. And so, very, very, it has to be some sort of specific circumstance where I would prep someone for a show less than a year apart. I've done that before where I prep people for like spring and then fall, but every time it's been because they competed in the spring and it qualified them for something in the fall. And so it was only good, that qualification was only good for that year. You know what I mean? And so it was like a circumstantial thing, but the conversation going in always in that case was you're taking a full calendar year off. Like, so if someone did spring, fall of 2018, you're taking all of 2019 off, 2020 is the earliest you're competing again. But like I said, time till your next show is definitely something I would take into consideration because, if you're a high level, like for example, Brian Whitaker, when he was winning the lightweight class at Worlds year after year after year, he would do the same show every single year. He was a high level advanced athlete. But the amount that he could let his, you could let someone in that situation can let their weight drift is going to be less than me having 4 years between shows, just from the time standpoint. And so, as far as where would I put their macros, there isn't really a one size fits all, but most people in the off season, at least a gram per pound of protein. Usually in the off season, most people have calories to spare. Your carbs are pretty high, your fat's pretty high, your protein's pretty high, so you have more calories to spare. And so some of it I base on preference too. Assuming you're already eating a gram per pound of protein, you're getting, you have a decent amount of carbs and fat. With those extra calories now, where do you prefer a little bit higher protein? Do you prefer a few more carbs, a little bit more fat? You know what I mean? And some people find that they actually run better on more carbs versus more fat. I've had clients who, if you increase their fat to like 35% of their calories, they feel way better than if their fat's like 25% of their calories. You know what I mean? And pulling the carbs back in the off season. So, some of that's individual too, but as a starting point, I probably would do, at least, 0.3 3.4 grams per pound of fat, a gram per pound of protein, and fill the rest in with carbs. But you should have plenty of extra calories that you can spread, throughout probably. Any of the macros based on your preference, because you just have extra calories available that you don't have during prep.
Excellent. Now, do you have any special recommendations for intake around the workout, like focusing more on carbs there, cutting back on the fats?
Yeah, I mean, the biggest thing I usually try to encourage someone to, it's not a one size fits all, because I've worked with people who, I used to always have the specific, just the generic recommendation, your highest carb meal of the day should be the one that's, an hour and a half to 3 hours before your workout, something like that. Mm-hmm. Should be your highest carb meal of the day. There are people, then I started working with people and realized that in real life, not everybody responds well to that. There are people who eat that, and then it's like Thanksgiving, post Thanksgiving, they want to go take a nap. They're not in a place where their performance in the gym is going to be high. And so for them, maybe being a little bit more moderate there is a good idea, rather than, having a high carb meal. And so I a lot of times encourage my clients to try, like, all right, try having high carb meals before a couple of your workouts. Try doing something that's maybe half that level, or 2/3 or, whatever before your workouts. Do you notice a difference? For me, personally, I would notice a difference if my carbs were lower before my workout, but that's not how it works for everyone. There are definitely people who you give them a high carb meal before their workout and they do not have a good workout and they don't feel good. They just want to sleep.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. That's actually one of the questions I actually ask clients is how they feel if they eat a high carb meal, and if they say that they feel sluggish, sleepy, and stuff, I know that maybe it's probably better to cut back on the carbs and increase the fats instead. And usually they also tell me that they respond better on a high fat diet. I'm actually the complete opposite. Like, I need to have tons of carbs to actually feel good, and I've never had an issue with if I eat a lot of carbs, I feel sleepy. I just feel more energized and I have better training session. But I don't get the same response if I try to eat a lot of fat.
No. And so, that's what I'd recommend, before a workout. And then protein, I mean, I usually give the general recommendation, you should probably be eating protein, with probably an hour or two before your workout. Probably a good idea to get some more in within an hour or two after your workout. That's my general recommendation with protein, is most people are going to have 4 to 6 protein feedings a day, and your workout just kind of fits between 2 of those protein feedings, for most people. And so that, that would be, my main recommendation there. If someone wants to do a post-workout shake, I don't stop them. If you fit it into your day, it's not worse, I feel like there's been such like a lot of the keyboard warriors, like, oh, well, there's data shows, like Alan Brad's meta-analysis. It's trivial at best, the size of the improvement from a post-workout shake immediately after your workout when protein is matched for the day. So everyone, a lot of people take that to mean, well, you're dumb if you have a post-workout shake. Well, no, you can have a post-workout shake. That's totally fine. It's not hurting your progress in any way. Is it helping? It's arguable, but it's not hurting you. So if you want to and you fit it into your day, it's not going to it's not going to hurt you in any way. And I just feel like, what I mean. A lot of people take science and they just run with it kind of the wrong way a lot of times and issues like that.
Yeah, it's funny that you mentioned that, because I had a discussion with one of the guys in my team yesterday. We were talking about, like, the science doesn't say that if you take a post-workout shake, it's worse for your training progress. It's not detrimental to your. It doesn't give you worse effects. It's just that some things are probably more important, like total calories and total protein and stuff like that. But it's like everything else, I feel, in the fitness industry. It goes from one extreme to the other, and people don't always are able to put things into context, because some recommendations are applicable for maybe high level athletes. Like, for example, I work with a lot of high level judo competitors here in Norway in combat sports, and they usually have like 2 sessions a day. And
Yeah.
there's no option in waiting 1 to 2 hours after a
Yes.
training session, because they have the next training session in 5 to 6 hours. So the recommendation there is like immediately as you finish your training session, you get nutrients in. But if you're training average Joe that goes to the gym 3-4 times a week and is going to consume a meal within 2 hours and then isn't going to train until the next day, it doesn't really matter. It's so, but yeah, I think it's a good thing that the fitness industry are more interested in science now.
Yes.
But I think there's maybe sometimes a lot of noise and things get misunderstood. So people jump from one end to the complete opposite side.
Absolutely. You see that. I feel like you see that too when you look at like, some of like the effect sizes in meta-analysis and things, it's amazing, clearly doing more than like, if we look at training, clearly doing more than 1 set per exercise is better than or 1 set per muscle group is better than the old school hit 1 set per muscle group. James Krieger, I think, has done multiple meta-analysis showing that. But it is amazing how much you can actually still grow from 1 hard set per muscle group. Like, you know what I mean? Like when you start looking at effect size differences, you know what I mean? Like you actually see a decent amount of growth. Same thing with people who, a lot of times, the one training, frequency of once a week versus more than once a week. You can actually get a lot of growth once, you know what I mean? Like you look at, it's not like it's 0 gains, and I feel like a lot of times people are like, oh, well, this person's in a pinch for time, so they're going to train, maybe they only can get in 1 or 2 sets per muscle group. Well, they're not going to grow. And it's like, well, no, actually there's pretty good data. You get, it's not going to be as good as doing 10 plus sets a week, but if you can only get 1 or 2 sets in and that's all you have time for, that's better than nothing by far.
Yeah, exactly. And this is I'm glad you say that, because I have this discussion with a lot of people sometimes. They would say like, oh, you're stupid. If somebody's training a bro split, they'll say, oh, you're stupid, you're not going to get any result from that. But I'm like, it might not be the most optimal thing based on the science that we have now or all the evidence that we have now. But if you do that and you have progress in the gym, you consistently over time lift more weights, you increase the volume over time, and you do that for 10 years, you're going to get results from that. But maybe you could have gotten more results if you had a more optimal training program.
Yeah, and I always wonder, how much of a difference is that making? You see a lot of people who aren't high level competitors stressing about a lot of these little details, and it's like, how much difference, is it going to make? I know. I was just talking to someone about this yesterday. I know that Brad Schoenfeld has data showing you training a weak part. He just posted that his study got accepted where they're training a weak. I haven't read it, but you train a weakness up to 45 sets a week, and that body part grows more. I need to actually read the paper once it's published to really comment more. But just I'm sure from what I gathered from what he has said, upper body training volume was lower. It was only lower body that was super high. And again, I haven't read the study, but if that's what they did, you're going to see people who see 45 sets per muscle group. If 45 sets is good, 50 or 60 is better. And if they just did that on legs, I'm going to do that for everything, and they're just going to take it and run with it. And that's not at all what it's meant to be.
Yeah, exactly. While we're on the topic, are there any supplements that you usually recommend during the off season that can be of benefit?
Yeah, I mean, obviously the usual general health ones that I'd recommend, a multivitamin isn't as important, you know what I mean, in the off season as during prep. You should be able to get a variety of foods, but it's if you have the money, it's not generally going to hurt you. It's kind of a fail safe. But food should still be the focus. A variety of foods, a variety of fruits and vegetables, different colors of fruits and vegetables should all be a focus. Fish oil, if someone doesn't eat a lot of fish, is probably a good idea. Other than that, protein powders, protein bars as necessary to hit your protein numbers. Do you need them? Some people eat, just hit their protein numbers without. It's totally, your call. Caffeine as necessary before a workout. Other than that, creatine, monohydrate. Maybe beta alanine, especially if you're a bodybuilder, you train in some of those higher rep ranges, or if you throw in some intensity techniques, like rest pauses or drop sets or supersets or something, could be beneficial. And maybe citrulline malate. I know we were just talking before we started recording. The jury is definitely out on citrulline based on some of the recent data. It kind of muddied the waters a little bit. But outside of that, I don't really recommend a whole lot more. And my general rule of thumb on supplements, when clients ask me about, well, what about this one? And it might be something that, like, I don't know, maybe there's some obscure evidence it may do something, but it isn't that strong of evidence. It's not like creatine level of evidence, just, a little bit of something in some obscure journal. Usually my general rule of thumb is, if you want to try it and you have the money and there's no evidence it's going to hurt you, the worst thing it's going to do is just cost you money. But if you don't notice anything, don't keep taking it, quit spending your money. Most people are like, yeah, I don't want to spend money. And I'm kind of in the same boat. I don't take a ton of supplements myself. But that's always my, general rule of thumb when I get asked, by clients or anyone, are you okay with spending money on something that may not do much?
Yeah, exactly. All right. Next question is, we've already talked about a couple of these things. As a natural bodybuilder, reaching super low levels of body fat can have a pretty negative effect on a couple of health issues, like, for example, hormone levels, metabolism, and stuff like that. And we talked about some of the strategies to get back as quickly as possible, but are there anything that you should monitor during that time? Like, are there anything that you use to track this? Do you look at do you get the clients to do blood work? Do you track their libido, their mood, their energy levels? What do you actually track to see the improvements that they have?
Yeah, I mean, if someone can get blood work, that's awesome, but that's not necessarily practical for all, what I mean, everyone to afford that and be able to get it all the time.
Mm-hmm.
I did have a client recently, though. He did blood work every 2 to 4 weeks coming out of his show. It was for like 6 months. It was freaking awesome. But I mean, he paid for that out of pocket, you know what I mean? And so I don't expect everyone to be able to do that, because we all have real lives and obligations and things. But, other things that I a lot of times track is, I usually I'm asking people as their weight's drifting up, okay, so on a scale of 0 to 10, with 0 being how you felt at the end of prep and 10 being how you felt before you started prep, when you're at your best, where would you rate, your hunger or your energy or how much you think about food or your sleep or how you feel overall, things like that. And usually, people are telling me it's 8, 9, 10 usually by the time they hit, kind of that bottom end of where they can actually sustain. It's starting to feel more normal again. So like I had said, I had a bikini client gain 10, 11 pounds in 6 weeks. Everything was basically 8, 9, 10 at that point. Like I'm feeling pretty good at this point. And, that, you know what I mean? Because she's kind of at the bottom end of where she could actually sit long term. I mean, her goal was still to let her weight drift up more than that, but we could start slowing rate of gain down at that point. Like, gaining quickly wasn't as urgent as it was when all of those numbers were 0 coming off of her show.
Thanks. And how do you actually know when they've recovered optimally? Like, is it based on let me explain in a different way. What is the most important parameter that you actually use to determine, okay, we've now reached a level where you've recovered optimally?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if there's one most important thing that I would look at. I mean, if they had blood work, that'd probably be a one thing. But for most people who don't or can't afford it, to do it all the time, things I would look at, probably a combination of things. How long has it been since your show? How long has your food been high? Is something you know what I mean, like higher than, and how long have you been not stage lean? That actually matters quite a bit, because you can't just binge out of your show and magically have hormone levels back to normal. Because if I remember right, Eric Trexler has data where they took a cohort of bodybuilders, and the ones that gained the quickest, binged out and gained the fat the quickest, didn't see the best rebound in hormones. It was actually the ones in the middle, for rate of gain. And so, how long you've been out of a deficit, how long have you been above stage lean? That I look at, because like I said before, when you're prepping people like spring versus fall, you got to keep them pretty close to stage lean in between. You only have like 6 months between shows. And so it's like 3 months of letting their weight drift some, but not as much as you would normally, and then trying to diet them back down. And that second cut is always harder. It always takes more to get back down there, because things just simply haven't normalized. You don't have time for things to normalize. And that's where people who compete over and over and over and never have an off season kind of downward spiral. But yeah, so time would be one thing. But as far as how they're feeling, I would say it's just a number of things. The strength in the gym probably should be high again. Energy should be high. Sleep patterns should be back to normal. Most people, sleep isn't very good when you're super lean. You just wake up all the time. Like, I could wake up at 5 a.m. without an alarm. I'd be tired the entire day during prep, but I'd be up at 5 a.m. without an alarm every day. And then, so sleep patterns, sex drive, just how you're feeling overall, just taking everything into account, where is your hunger? How often are you thinking about food? All of those things, a lot of times kind of come together. You know what I mean? Like, you don't oftentimes say, well, my strength is still terrible, but I'm full all the time and I can't eat anymore. You know what I mean? Like, usually it's, I'm thinking less about food. I'm feeling more full. My strength is really coming back. Like, they all kind of go together in one direction, rather than one going one way and the other's going the other.
Yeah, exactly. And I know the sleep thing is probably one of the worst things for people when they're trying to cut, especially waking up early, probably looking for food or something.
Yeah, one thing I found that actually is helpful to, not everybody, but a good number of people is, I always prioritize, for people who handle carbs well, we talked about, your biggest carb meal should be before your workout. A lot of times would recommend someone's basically second biggest meal be before bed, when they're dieting for a show. Because a lot of times I found it actually helps people sleep better, to have a little bit bigger meal before bed. It used to be, I remember when I first started competing, did my first prep for 2004, you didn't eat any carbs or anything at all, maybe even after like 7 or 8 p.m. or some magic time, and that's not the case at all. That's not going to impair your progress. We have plenty of data that shows that. And so, eating a little bit more of your carbs or just a little bit more of your calories in general before bed, for a lot of people can be a way to help you sleep better.
Yeah, exactly. All right, Pete, let's wrap up this podcast. Could you give us a take-home message on the things that we've discussed today?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing I would say is you need to have a plan for after your show, like at the start of prep. So when you're starting prep, you need to know, hey, I'm going to regain food after my show. This is what you don't need to have an exact plan, but this is tentatively kind of how we're going to do this. The post-show still needs to be thought about, before you start dieting down. And then once you start dieting out of a show or coming out of a show, the first thing I'd worry about primarily is getting yourself back to feeling more normal again. That doesn't mean binging, but, a pound, 2 pounds a week for the first couple months to get you back to where you're kind of at the low end of that, set point range, is probably a good idea. And then from there, adjusting based on what your goals are and your specific situation in the off season and how much weight you can afford to gain and want to gain and all of those factors. So I know that was more than one take home point, but that probably summarized things.
Yeah, excellent summary. All right, Pete, where can people find more information about you?
So you can check out my website, fitbodyphysique.com. I'm on Facebook just as me, or my business Facebook page, but I don't use that much anymore. And then I'm also on Instagram, at fitbodyphysique. So any of those are totally fine if anyone wants to reach out.
Excellent. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you to the listeners that's been following us today. If you haven't already subscribed to the channel, please do. And we would also appreciate if you left us a review on one of our other platforms like Stitcher or iTunes. Peter, thank you so much for joining me today. I had a really good time, and I think the listeners also benefited a lot from the things that we discussed today. And we should probably try to bring you back on to discuss another topic in the near future.
Awesome. Yeah.
Perfect. All right, Pete. Have a continued nice day. I'm soon off to bed. It's big time difference between where we are. I'm usually doing these podcasts at night. So wishing you a pleasant day, and we'll speak soon again.
Thanks for having me.
My pleasure. Bye bye.
Bye.